how would you go about um, the whole idea of wanting to go into other countries to ensure that there's brand recognition, you're addressing the distribution challenges, and you're also tackling the cultural nuances that could be barriers for you to get through. So what does that process look like of wanting to go to another country? What do you need to do in terms of what are the factors that you will need to consider as you purpose to go beyond Kenya? So over to you, Fiona.
Yeah, thank you, Sonny. When SMEs or entrepreneurs are looking to go beyond markets, the first thing that is really necessary to do is do market research. Market research is really important in order to understand, number one, the target audience. Who is your target audience in that market? What are their preferences? What are their what's their age? What's their gender? How do they like to communicate or to be communicated to? Secondly, the research needs to include understanding the market as a whole. Is there demand for your product? You may be wanting to export pineapples to Ghana, but maybe there's no demand for pineapples. So maybe Ghana is not your best market. So it's important to do market research as well to understand, the export potential and the demand for your product. The next thing is also to research things like the cultural nuances. As we always love to say, Africa is not a country. We are all so different. The way Kenyans like, specific types of foods or flavors and how to be talked to is very different to how someone, even in Tanzania, our neighbors are very different. You can imagine now going into West Africa, North Africa, you need to understand the different tolerance levels and so on, and cultural nuances. I'll give a great example of a project that I was part of with the International Trade Center, which is a UN organization that is really focused on global trade. So I'd worked on a project with them in the specialty coffee sector. And what we were doing there was coaching coffee growers in Kenya who were growing specialty coffee to export to the international market. As mentioned, I love coffee, and for other coffee lovers out there, specialty coffee is a very unique, high-grade coffee. It's not your commodity coffee that is, sold at the auction. So this is a coffee that has a very discerning type of audience who you need to really understand. And so when I was part of this project, one of the things that we wanted to impart to the coffee growers as they were looking to export out to the other markets is understand your audience. Your audience want to know, how is this coffee grown? Tell me the story of how this coffee is grown from A to B. How is it processed? Are there any chemicals? Is it fully organic, certified organic? Or are you just claiming to be, organic? There's a term called greenwashing. A lot of discerning consumers want to know, are you actually certified organic? The other thing is knowing about your community. How are you impacting your community? Are you growing? Are the women who are working in your farm, is it impacting women and youth and so on? So it was really an interesting project working with the coffee growers, letting them know that specialty coffee consumers out in the export markets really need to know this information. And so doing research and knowing that about the end consumer help them to know how to package their product so that it's successful when they do export it to the global market. As I mentioned, International Trade Center, ITC, have some amazing tools out there, because I know doing research can seem very daunting for SMEs. And so one tool that I would love to recommend is called the Global Help Desk. So this tool has all export products you could ever imagine. So let's say you are in Kenya and you want to export to Australia, for example, and you want to export leather bags. You can go in there and put in leather bags and you want to export to Australia. And this tool will give you information about, the export potential. Is there demand for your product? What are the regulations that you need to have prepared so that you can export successfully? What are the tariffs that you will encounter when you do export? Who are the shipping partners that you can contact, to ship your products? So, this is a great tool that can help with that research element. And the last thing that I would like to discuss that you talked about was the brand recognition side of things. As you go to different markets, you need to create a very strong brand. And I know a lot of people think brand is just, the logos, but brand is actually made up of three key components. Number one is brand strategy. And brand strategy is really around understanding, the why behind your product, the vision and the mission, the what, what are you selling, being very clear about what you're selling and packaging it effectively, understanding who you're selling it to, your target audience, as I mentioned. Then the second part about brand is your brand identity. And this is, the logo that we mentioned, like what is your symbol gonna be? When you're out in the market, how will people recognize you? What's that symbol? Your brand colors and your tone of voice. And then lastly, the last element of brand is your brand management. How will you ensure that you have consistency consistency of your brand across different touch points? Touch points, I mean, if you're on e-commerce, how will your brand show up? If you're on Instagram, how will your brand show up? If you're doing packaging, how will your brand show up? So again, when you're thinking about going out into markets, you need to think about all these different components because you're going to a global stage where it's a lot more competitive.